Hi, good morning. And I'm MJ from Linus Publications. And today we're going to be doing a session on a state because that state had a special election yesterday, and it's a deeply red state. And guess what? A Democrat won. Hmm. This is in the state of Iowa. And what happened is because a Democrat won, it went from having a supermajority of Republicans to simply a majority. And that makes a difference. So, usually every year before elections come up, specifically the presidential elections, I do look at the states individually. And I look to see whether they might be moving in a certain direction, whatever. Uh, so I haven't done that yet, but I have all the states charts that I'm going to start working up for the 2028 election. But I said, you know what? Let's do a session on Iowa. I think for some people this will be interesting. For others, it'll be just too deep in the weeds, and you're going to say, nope, don't want to listen to this. But this is good in that I don't think we've done a few state charts, and they're interesting. We don't have times of birth usually for these, so we have to just go by. Usually, I use an 11:30 time frame, and the date for Iowa entering the Union was the United States, December 28th of 1846. So we use that. And the date I'm using for the transits is August 26th, which was yesterday. Now, we're going to have the natal chart and the transits. We're going to have the progression, and we're going to have the solar arc. And we're going to look at these and see where we might be seeing maybe a little bit of a shift towards a Democrat. Now, some of these actually relate back to the 2024 election, and I'm just going to touch on those just a little bit to say, well, this influence is sort of moving away now. It's going to be gone. So, let's take a look first at a natal chart with the transits in the outer ring. And I do want to point out a few things here. With Iowa has the sun in Capricorn, Venus in Capricorn. It also has Uranus in Aries, Pluto in Aries. And that is sort of moving you towards, okay, we're probably, and also Mercury in Sagittarius. So we've got fire signs and earth signs, which is typically tending more towards Republican. Again, not a hard and fast rule, but we've got a sort of a tendency to move in that direction. So let's take a look first at Saturn. We have both Saturn and Neptune sitting at about 0 Aries. So they've moved into a new sign. And they were actually making a trine a little bit earlier to Mars. Now, Saturn and Neptune would have been in the last election running in effect, Pisces, which would have made that a trine to the Mars here. Now, Saturn typically can be reflective of conservative type policies. Neptune, idealism. So in this case, they were moving at the last election towards their idealistic type tendencies of looking at the Conservative Party. Now that influence is moving away. The next election, Saturn is not going to be making any angle to Mars. And Mars in their natal chart would have been the way that the state is acting. So where they're being pushed to. So they want to act. What's pushing that action? In effect, sticking with their idealistic conservative tendencies. Now that will be going away when we're moving into the 2026 and the 2028 elections. We'll have other things that are coming into play on the Mars, in effect, sort of pushing away for the state to act. Now we also have Uranus here. Uranus, in effect, was making a position to Mars. So here, and this would have been happening again at the last election. It's moving away from that opposition now. Now, Uranus is change. And in effect, it would have been trying, and the opposition is a conflict, so it would have been trying to push change onto the way we're acting. Now, that didn't necessarily succeed, so there wasn't change, but that's because we had these other angles that were coming into play. Now, what else should we be looking at? Well, right now, for this election, what we see is we have, and I don't usually go down into the Mars-Venus, but I thought it's important in this case. We have Mars. Mars is what? Going to be pushing you to action. And what is it hitting? Uranus, which in the chart, especially in this state chart, is looking at maybe making a shift in a new direction. Doesn't necessarily say Democrats or Republicans, just saying a shift in a new direction. So maybe other things are becoming more important. Now let's take a look at the progression. On the progression, what we see is, first off, Mercury. Mercury is how we're thinking. Mercury can be policies, things like that. Not so much idealistic type of thoughts or philosophical. Idealistic would be Neptune. Philosophical would be Jupiter. But Mercury is more, policies, actual things that affect us on a day-to-day living. Okay, price of things, whether we can get a car, whether we can get a mortgage. That's in Cancer. And what happens is that is now in square, or will be literally in about a month or two. So this is actually in play with this election. That was square to Pluto. What's Pluto? Foundation. So it is the state's foundation, pretty much what it's based on. What's Mercury saying? Well, maybe we need to start taking these things into account. So we now have issues with sort of the things people are thinking about. Okay, what's on their mind? And that is not in line with their foundation. So that was likely also leading to a little bit of shift here where everyone thought the Republican would be winning, but they didn't. What else do we have? Well, we have Mars. Mars is action. And it's specifically being pushed onto Sun. That is their individuality. That is what they feel they are. That is how they perceive themselves. Sun is in Capricorn, so they are reserved. They are very down to earth. They want results. But Mars here is in a square to that. What that's saying is we need to change that. We need to change what we are or how we're acting here. So we need to act in a way or change how our identity is, change what our identity is, because it may not be working. That's important. So that's a little bit of a shift too. And this is not quite there yet. It will be in about a year, which is about the time of the 2026 elections. Okay. Now, what else do we have on the Sun? And again, the Sun would be the state identity, what the state and the people think they are. Well, we actually have the Sun coming up opposing it. Now, this is going to be in about 3 years, but I was thinking it's important to bring this up now, because 3 years is when? It's when the 2028 elections are. So Sun is the state, the people saying, I think we're different than what we used to be. Doesn't mean they're Democratic. Please don't get me wrong. Doesn't mean they're more Republican, but they're different. Maybe their needs are different. Maybe what they needed before is not aligned anymore with what they need now. So this is sort of them saying we need to maybe identify who we are again and what we stand for, what we want others to see us as, and what we also want to show to the world. Important point. Now, we also have Mercury doing a square to both the North Node and the South Node. Important. In this case, Mercury, and it's not quite exact yet. That means that the state, the people are coming to a point where, and this is on, since this is Mercury doing, this is on their thoughts, they're coming to a point of saying, well, if I think this way, and this is the way I'm thinking, and it's never gotten me to where I need to be, do I need to adjust my thinking? So it's a karmic type of position. So for people that are not spiritual or think about moving to a next plane of existence, this is not something that would be interesting to you. But to where Iowa is and as it grows, this is important. So it's saying, maybe I've thought all these things, but maybe that hasn't led me or provided anything for me. Maybe I need to think differently. So it's a point where you just sort of reassess. Now, we also have Jupiter here, and Jupiter is making an inconjunct to Mars, which is action. What is Jupiter? It's expanding, is opportunities. Well, the inconjunct it's making is a break and adjust. Break and adjust here is very clear in saying the way that's acting on Mars is we're not getting opportunities. So the opportunities that are coming are not coming in effect to the state. So something has to change here in the way the state is acting to be able to realize the opportunities. So important point. Now, this has already occurred. So since this is Jupiter involved, it could also be just a little bit of sort of progressive policies. And progressives, I'm just meaning, a little bit more into the Democrat rather than Republican. Maybe that was also showing up here, saying, 1 minute. I mean, Iowa is a farm state. Literally, the tariffs will be shutting off a lot of the avenues for that state. This is, in effect, they voted for someone that is going to devastate the small farms. Okay, so let's move to the next one, which is the solar arc. I said this is going to be a long one, and I meant it, but there's a lot to cover here. And this is typically what I go through for all the states before elections. Actually, I do more than this. So let's take a look at the solar arc. In this case, what we have is now we have us Saturn and Neptune coming up, and it's now going to trine Pluto. Now, Saturn and Pluto is a foundation. And with a state, it would be what they're based on. It would be, in effect, how they, allocate things like money and, where their, important things are. So when we have Saturn and Neptune now moving to trine Pluto, it means that they're going to be reassessing their idealistic needs for that state. They're also going to be looking at how to achieve it. So Saturn is actually very good in putting focus. When it's in a difficult angle, it will be restrictive. But when it's in a good angle, it makes you focus, makes you understand how to get things done. So this is actually good for the state. Now, let's take a look at our next one here, which is Uranus. Uranus is change. So this is in effect, and it's a transit, it's bringing change, ideas, revolutionary new ways of doing things, or sometimes rebellion against. We have this in a square angle to the sun. And it is pretty close, which means it relatively just happened. So could we take a look at this election and say, yeah, this is probably a byproduct of this Uranus making that square angle to the sun, the identity? Yeah, that's probably because, in effect, this is the state identity. They identify as a particular type of party, particular views. And this could be bringing new ideas and thoughts into that. But it's a clash. It's not an easy angle, which means there's going to be a lot of fight. Because of this, I wouldn't be surprised if they start looking at doing redistricting too. Just because when a party is a power, and it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican, if they are in supermajority type of power, they are not going to want to lose that. Since they're in a supermajority, they will make a quick grab for power. So they will change laws. They will change things to make sure that they don't lose it. That's a problem in a lot of states that have a supermajority. Whether it be Democratic or Republican, it's a problem on both sides. Okay. Now, Uranus is also making a trine. This is a good one. What's it making a trine to? Jupiter. So this is, in effect, this is change coming to the state, and it's in the form of Jupiter. Jupiter is what? Opportunities, some progressive ideas, so associated with Democrats. Again, I'm thinking that there might just be a slight shift here in Iowa, more towards a progressive type of agenda. Again, not a lot, Now, this is going to be in about 2 years, which means we're probably looking at either 2026 or, 30, probably around the 2026 timeframe, maybe into 2028. I'd have to do charts for 2028, but I don't think it's going to go that far. So what do I see here? I see a little shift in Iowa. Not a large one, but I think it might shift just a little bit more. It will always be a Republican state, at least, over these next 2 elections, but by how much? So this is relatively interesting to me and people that sort of get into the weeds on stuff like this. Have a great day, and thank you for watching. And again, check out my website, lionesspublications.com, because I do charts for regular people. And I do, in effect, a chart that looks at going out a year to see what would be going on. And it usually picks up on, things that are happening in your life. Not to great detail, but, picks up, oh, this thing is changing and this. Have a good one.